I shared very transparently like all of my rates for content. And I got so many people who messaged me and said, "No way do you charge this much money."
Yeah, the influencer seems to have taken on a slightly negative tone at times. All right. Well, hey, I'll dive in. So I'd love to start, Kristen, with just understanding why you do what you do.
Yeah, I in when I was a kid, honestly in 2008, this is when I was in middle school, I had a blog. I lived in a really small town and I loved fashion, and so I wanted to have a space to share it with other people who kind of like understood, because the people surrounding me at the time definitely did not. And I honestly have just been riding the wave ever since, just kind of having that creative outlet to share my passions with other people. And I would say probably in 2018 is when things really started to become a little bit more intentional or a little bit more serious for me, where I realized that I could actually turn this into a business instead of just a hobby. And I, again, have just been kind of riding that wave ever since.
In what I've been looking at in trying to better understand your business, you've got a decent amount of diversification. I'm curious how you think about diversification versus, say, focus in like revenue specifically or business models.
Mhm. It's definitely something that we've been doing a lot of experimenting with. I know as a creator, I think having multiple streams of income is very important, because we don't want to have those months where we're like, how are we going to pay our bills this month? So I've definitely experimented with a lot of different streams of revenue, but I've also kind of like tailored that in a little bit more in the last year or so. I used to have a bunch of courses and, a membership and a podcast and merchandise and all of these different things. And I kind of had to take a hard look at everything that I was putting out there and ask myself what was actually moving the needle for me. And for me, that was my membership and my courses. And so I started to actually get rid of a lot of the other things like the merchandise or, I guess kind of just like other little random things I was testing out, different freebies or lead magnets. And I eventually really honed in on what I found was actually working to create, actual revenue for us.
So what is it? So you've focused in on membership specifically, membership community
Mhm.
and courses. What was it that it sounds like in terms of results, revenue, that's was the biggest component. Is there more to it? That why do you think that is what's driving the most growth for you?
Yeah, I mean, our membership is definitely the highest product that we sell the most of. It's definitely where I put a lot of my focus as well, and that is like a monthly subscription basis. I
Mm-hmm.
think the reason why that does so well and why I honestly love it, I think more than anything else that we offer, is simply the community, like the genuine connections that I'm able to build with other people, that with other offers that I've had, or even with my courses sometimes that I don't have the same experience with. So we do a lot of, like live group meetings where I get to actually hang out with these people on a weekly basis, and we're all friends, like we all know each other so well at this point. We hang out every week. And we almost kind of act as like a board for each other in our businesses. So that's been such an important part of my growth as a creator and as a business owner, but as so many other people's as well.
Okay, so within your community, that's the one of the biggest focuses for you. It sounds like there's a lot of accountability. How long you been running the community for?
So we started the community in June of 2022. So it's been a little over two
Okay.
years.
Okay. And can you share a bit more? I don't know how transparent you are on the, financials and revenue breakdown. Is like, how do you see that in terms of breaking this stuff down?
Mhm. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. Prior to starting the membership with kind of like courses and consulting calls and things like that, I would say that coaching aspect of my business was probably about 25% of my
Mhm.
annual revenue, and brand partnerships were about 75%. And I was really afraid to make the change to kind of being more of a coach, because I was afraid I would lose out on that 75% of my income as a creator. Totally not what had happened, thankfully,
Mhm.
but it's actually totally swapped now, where about 75% of my income comes from my coaching offers, and probably 55 to 60% of that is specifically my membership.
Oh wow. Okay. And when you say coaching, that's
Mhm.
courses and membership basically. Is that how you're
Yes.
seeing
Yep.
it, or do you include courses in your coaching?
Yeah, I do include the courses in my coaching.
Yeah.
Because my priority is definitely like getting people into the membership. I'm bad at this. I think I should do a better job of it. Do as I say, not as I do. I
Yeah.
definitely should put a little bit more energy into leading people into my courses, but I personally just wanted to be able to take like all of my energy and put that directly into my membership just to kind of see
hmm
what would happen if I really put my all into it. And again, it probably makes up about 60% of our revenue at this point, which is great.
That's great. And I wouldn't push you to do otherwise. I think focusing on the thing that you're passionate about and it's working for you is great. Obviously, you're delivering value to the people in the membership. They're continuing to pay you and you're loving it clearly. So I think it's a great place to, I wouldn't fixate on feeling bad about not doing more other things. I know that's like an affliction
Mhm.
so many of us entrepreneurs have. Oh, I should do this other thing. I think if you're
Yeah.
doing what's working and what's driving passion for you, I think that's great.
Yeah, and actually that is something I kind of like came to the realization of in the last couple of years. I read this book earlier this year called 10x is easier than 2x. Have you heard of it before?
No. I've heard the
I
statement,
feel
but
like
never
it
heard
had
about the book.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it had like this big moment where everyone was reading it. I was on that train and I also read it. And it's funny, I was actually right in the pre-launch week of a cohort-based course that I was launching. And I was reading it and going, oh my gosh, I can't believe how many things I'm doing right now. And how, again, if I were to just really focus on what I'm most excited about, like I wonder what would happen. And so that book is actually what got me to really like hone in on the membership. And it's funny, I canceled my whole launch and everything. I had already done all the work for it. And I was like, I don't want to start another 8-week cohort if I'm ready to make this decision to just go all in on the membership.
Oh, that's great. And I think that's amazing that you did that with the launch ready to go and made that hard call. It's rare, I think, that people are willing to say no and cut things off, especially when there's revenue at stake, right? But it sounds like
Mhm.
it's worked out really well for you. And I think it's often the mark of good strategy and good entrepreneurs is that ability to say no to things. So
Yeah, I
I'm
mean, if there's one thing that I've learned, it's being able to kind of like make those shifts and just naturally
yeah.
evolving and being okay with change. I
Mm.
think as people, we're definitely a little wary of change for the most part, but I've definitely, as an entrepreneur, learned to embrace it as much as I can.
Yeah. And you mentioned it used to flip and it was 75% brand sponsorships. Now it's the other way and it's mostly around the membership and courses, but mostly membership. I can imagine the membership, one of the obvious gains is that it's recurring revenue. So you start the month with customers who are already paying, as opposed to brand sponsorships or other one-off sales where you've often got to go out and renew and renegotiate, or if it's an existing client or even find new clients. Any other like other things that for you were eye-opening or a positive or benefit or even a negative of making the shift from brand sponsorships to the membership? Like how do you see the comparison there?
I think it's actually been way more positive than I thought it was going to be. As someone who is sharing like a lot of lifestyle content, I didn't think that there were going to be a lot of brands who wanted to work with me as a coach who was selling my own product.
hmm
But when I actually kind of like made this shift of becoming more of a creator coach versus just like an influencer, I was able to narrow my audience down so much. So my audience now is just majority of them are content creators who are looking to monetize. And so it's actually been really a lot easier to get partnerships because I'm working with brands who are looking for that exact audience, and my audience is so tailored that it's more I guess I'm more confident that I'm going to give them a good ROI when we're working together versus when I was sharing 50 different things about multiple different topics.
mm
I trying to work with brands, I was never really totally sure if like is everyone going to like this? Will people actually go buy this? So I feel actually a lot more confident in my brand partnerships now than I did prior, which is kind
Huh.
of crazy.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack in what you just said that I think is really interesting. It's like this move. There's this, and I see it in a lot of different ways. This is the first time I've kind of seen it exactly the way you specified it of like, being because you're what I'm hearing, and tell me if I'm getting it wrong, but what I'm hearing is because you've got your own product, the membership, you can sort of really niche down who your focus and target and your content and who you're serving to a real persona or ideal customer profile, which means you care less probably about the volume of subscribers or viewers as opposed to the quality and the type, because you know you can make, and I think because you've niched down and you have your own product, which is more profitable than say selling someone else's, you're able to worry less about volume of viewers and earn more per viewer and per view significantly, which lets you have that niche focus with also paradoxically almost makes your audience more valuable to the advertiser or the brand sponsor. So it's a beautiful marriage there. I've seen the smaller audience makes more in a lot of different permutations, but this one's kind of a new way of looking at it, which I think is really exciting as like an additional benefit to it.
Yeah, and I mean, this is one of the reasons why when I'm helping creators price their partnerships, I'm always like, don't get so hung up on your follower count because you could have 10,000 followers and they are a super specific group of people. And that's actually a lot more
Mhm.
valuable for most brands versus having 50,000 followers who they don't really exactly know who those people are.
Right.
It's funny. I actually shared, I got dragged on the internet pretty recently. I on Threads, I shared very transparently like all of my rates for
Mhm.
content. And I got so many people who messaged me or responded to my thread and said, "No way do you charge this much money. You only have 25,000 followers. Like you're crazy." I mean, people were dragging me. They were super upset about it. And I was like, "No, but I do. Like I have the receipts to prove it, you know?" And again, I think it's because so many brands realize
Mhm.
that, yeah, I have 25,000 followers, but they are 25,000 people that very likely will want to buy this product because I'm only working with brands who, again, are looking to reach my specific audience.
Right. And especially then they see the results, they repeat all of that.
Mhm.
But I think a lot of that, as I said, like it's interesting that you've unlocked that because of the shift to your own product and the membership, allowing you to focus down and have a more concentrated audience that is also of higher value. It's interesting. You mentioned the 10K, and I know you wrote an article or were interviewed in one around 10,000 subs and what people with 10K subs or less are earning. And, you know, there was some, I think you'd looked at a bunch of different creators who were sort of in the 10K subs, like around 6 or 7 or 5,000, making sort of $250, $500 per brand deal. And I know you're doing, you know, more than that, especially with the 25,000 and a concentrated audience and your own product. But it's interesting because I imagine, I don't know if you know what those groups are at, but sub 10,000 is obviously the bulk of creators out there. It's hard to really blast through into the millions where you kind of need to be if you're going to make big dollars from ad revenue. But there are other ways with things like courses, memberships, where you can do really well sub 10,000. With the ones that where you see them doing brand deals below 10,000, do you have a sense of what an annual income looks like there if you're just doing brand deals and ads as opposed to getting into your own products?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the creators that I work with that are in that sub 10,000 category, they're kind of across the board on what they're
Oh.
charging because their niches, some of them are way more targeted than
Mm.
others. I have one creator who they're at about 13,000 followers. When we first started working together, they were charging about
Mhm.
$250 per post. Now on Instagram, they're charging $950 per post. I think last time I talked to them, they had made in the last 8 months since we've been working together around 13,000, and that was through
Mhm.
like that whole learning process too.
Mhm.
So definitely like a big jump in realizing that
Mhm.
again, even though you have less than 10,000
Mhm.
followers, you can still be charging $1,000 for a post. Again, if you have the proof, the case studies to show that it doesn't really matter if I
Yeah.
only have this many followers. Look at I'm making this money. So I think case studies are really
Mhm.
powerful to be able to show brands
Mhm.
why you are charging what you're charging as well.
I'm curious, would you encourage people to follow, like, let's someone is around that 10,000 or even sub 10,000 mark. Would you encourage them to follow in your footsteps a bit on the digital products, owning your own products, like either your own community or your own course in terms of, and certainly one thing I see is you earn more per view, per viewer with something you own. How do you see that? Do you guide people in that direction? Is that something where it depends on each person and their audience, or how do you look at that?
I think it would never be a bad idea for a creator who wants to make like a full-time income to look into those opportunities for, how can you essentially sell your expertise? And sometimes it can be a little bit more outside the box on how you have to figure out what that's going to look like. I have one creator that I work with who is a mental health creator. So she shares a lot about like self-care and taking care of yourself. And she actually at first was thinking that she wanted to create some sort of coaching. But her challenge was, I'm not like a therapist. I'm not
Mhm.
certified. I didn't go to school for this. Like I'm kind of more of this friend that's just supporting and holding someone's hand and maybe giving them some ideas, but I don't want to, have a course or have
Mhm.
one-on-one calls just to again like not cross any lines. And so what she did was she actually created a community that essentially allows people to kind of like get together for what she calls like vent sessions. Every Sunday, she has what she calls mindful week ahead. So every Sunday,
Mhm.
we all sit down and like plan our week. So she has these opportunities for people to get together and still take care of themselves and again focus on self-care and wellness, but it's not such an obvious product. And she's not necessarily like coaching us. So I think if you can
Right.
think outside the box and find a digital product of sorts that would work for you and I think fit in very organically. It doesn't always have to be you coaching someone. I say why not? I think it's really great, especially with something that is maybe passive or a little bit more of like a recurring revenue. That's so
Mhm.
helpful for you to have versus solely relying on brand partnerships. Because some
Yeah.
months it can get like kind of scary. You don't know what you're gonna make.
Yeah, definitely. I hear you on that one. It's interesting. So my own YouTube channel, before I started Thinkific, I was doing my own course and YouTube channel, and I was checking this morning. So obviously, I haven't tended it in about 12 years now, so it's a little bit
Oh,
like it's starting to die. But the channel's got 6,700, so 6.7K subs, um, and it's doing $2,000 RPM, so $2,000 revenue per thousand views. So like at
mhm.
670,000 views, it's done well over $1 million in revenue so far. So I think, and that's just like I have no brand sponsor, never had a brand
Yeah.
sponsorship, and I probably made a few $100s in ads in the early days. But again, with ads, brand sponsorships, I was looking at either $3 to $5 RPM or $50 RPM. So for me, the shift to the digital product was going from something
Right.
that you know might pay the grocery bill or a piece of it to something that was like full significant income. So I think that I hear what you're saying, and it's interesting. You mentioned like the passive and the recurring, and I find sometimes they tend to be it's one or the other. Like I have passive because I have courses, people buy them, and I don't have a lot of engagement beyond the purchase. But I much prefer now the recurring
Mhm.
because if you can have that, you do need to be more engaged and involved. But I think like you said, you're it's a little safer than a lot of other models where you're trying to find that revenue each month.
Yeah, and I think the thing that's really nice about having a digital product too is like you have the control over it. Like you're
Mm.
not waiting for someone else to say, "Oh yeah, we'll hire you for a brand partnership at this rate." You're coming in and saying, "No, this is
Mhm.
what I'm going to charge. I'm going to try and sell this many. Here's how I'm going
Mhm.
to do it." And you can do as little
Mhm.
or as much as you want to reach the goals. I think it's nice to have something that you have a little bit more control over because sometimes brand partnerships even if you're doing everything quote unquote right and at the right time for the right brand and all
Mhm.
of that, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be one of the creators that they cast for a campaign. So
Right.
having that control, I think, is very nice.
Yeah. Yeah. And you still get to be a creator in the whole creation of your
Hmm.
offering, which is exciting. Love to shift gears for a second and talk about the role of media. I know you've been featured in Business Insider, Bloomberg, New York Post, etc. How do you see the role of media for yourself or even for other creators, influencers out there?
It's so funny. This is perfect timing. Yesterday, I just came out with a podcast episode all about this. I definitely feel like it's such a great way to solidify your personal brand. Because
Mm.
at the end of the day, we can say we're so great, we're an expert, we're this, we're that. But when someone else says it in their an outlet that people know and trust, I think
Mm.
it definitely adds a lot more credibility and more authority in your niche. I've try to really just kind of continue to build relationships with the people who work at these outlets and
Mm.
even actually share a lot of content on platforms like LinkedIn where I can share my opinions on things happening in my industry. And very often based off of those posts on LinkedIn, I'll have people reach out to me from those outlets and say, "Hey, I saw that you shared this. That was a really interesting opinion. We want to explore it further." And
Mm.
that has been one of the most organic ways for me to get featured in these different outlets, is literally just sharing my thoughts on
Mm.
things.
Wow. So you're building like I'm curious how you do this because you're getting good exposure. You're building relationships. You're sharing your own stuff. Are you sharing theirs as well to kind of get their attention, or is there some intentionality of how you build the relationships? Or
Honestly, I wouldn't say that I really share their content
mm,
specifically to do that kind of what I call like warming up step. It's
yeah,
more just interacting with them.
mm,
So I love LinkedIn for this. And this is actually like a huge part of what I teach, even for brand
mm,
partnerships. I have a method called the anti-pitch method, because I personally, at this point in time, I really don't think that cold pitch emails do much. I think they're
they're
kind of a
tough.
waste of
Yeah.
time. So I like to tell people to stray away from them as much as possible. And this is the same with, press. So I'm really like spending time showing that person that I want to actually get to know them. So
Mm,
I'll very often connect on LinkedIn, and interact with things that they post, share my opinions when they're asking for them, interact with different platforms that maybe they're sharing content on. And I think very organically we build a relationship from there and start to have more conversations, so that again, like, now they know who I am because we've had that connection initially, and they're able to kind of understand where my expertise lies and where my authority lies, and come to me when they do have things that they're working on that I'd be a good fit for.
that's great. And it's another place where you niching down and being really clear on who you're focused on serving and what you serve
Yeah.
really helps because when you go check you out online, which people should do, it's really obvious, right? What your kind of areas of expertise
Mhm.
are because of this focus. Um,
Yeah, it's so
yeah.
interesting to me. I think that the niche conversation is definitely one that gets a lot of uh controversy going. I
Mm,
think people have like they either land on one side of the spectrum or the
mhm,
other. I personally am a big believer in having a niche, but I don't think it necessarily needs to be like one word that perfectly describes you. I think it's more of a mission. So
mhm.
I couldn't really put one word on exactly what it is that I do, but I do know my mission is to help creators monetize and create a whole business out of what their online creation is, right? So I can have a lot more flexibility within my quote unquote niche, but I don't need to have one word that describes it, but it's still very targeted.
No, definitely. It's clear that it is, and I think you're right. It doesn't need to be that one word. Um,
Hmm.
I'm curious. Do you see? Is there a difference between an influencer and a creator? And I know I'm getting into just the vocabulary here, but since you're working with a lot of them, like, is there a difference? Do you define them differently? See them very differently?
I don't really think I do, honestly. I think I used to. I used to see it more as like influencer was someone who was, influencing their community. And then creators were more people who were just like doing a lot of user generated content and just simply being on the creative side, not necessarily the community building side.
Mm,
But I do feel like at this point, I think it has merged so much because so many creators who are, again, maybe even doing user generated content for brands, they
mhm.
also have now built communities. So they're kind
Right.
of also influencers as well. So I think it used to be a lot easier to tell the difference between the two, but now I think it's all merged into one. But I will say I
Yeah.
think a lot of people prefer to be called creators than
Yes.
influencers at this
Yeah.
point.
Yeah. The influencer seems to have taken on a slightly negative tone at times. But yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm curious in what you see in the psychology there, like getting to work with so many creators. Is there, uh, as you work with them, is there, yeah, just on the psychology side, what do you see there?
I very often joke that it's not really a joke, but I say to myself that I feel like my job as a coach is like 50% logistics and 50% therapy. We do a lot of like emotional work together because a lot of the things that happen as entrepreneurs with like a lot of the
Mm,
rejection, and
mm,
frustrations and things like that, so much of it is mental.
mhm,
And so I can't be a coach that's teaching you like, here's the education of how you can do this step by step without touching on the emotional side as well. And I think that's one of the benefits of me having that community, is it's not always me who's saying like, no, you'll get through this. It's everyone else who's in the room with us saying, no, I literally did this and I got through it. And then someone else says, yeah, me too, and I did this and it was the same for me. And so you kind of
Mhm.
have like this feeling of like, okay, I'm not alone. It's not as bad as I'm maybe making it to be in my head. The imposter syndrome is normal. We're all kind of feeling it. And so it's really nice to hear that you're not alone in those situations. But I think there is definitely a lot of emotional frustration with being a creator.
Yeah, it's a couple of things you said. I mean, definitely the community is very real, and having, I think, a community of peers, especially if they're at similar levels, having similar struggles to
Hmm.
you. Like some are a little, they're coming up and you can help them out, and some are a little beyond you, so that you can learn from their mistakes or the things. But having that community of peers facing similar challenges can be so helpful. And it can be hard to find sometimes, I think, as a creator, especially on the as you get more
Hmm.
successful, right? There's obviously lots of places where people are really early in the game, but finding communities where people are starting to achieve more success can be kind of tough.
Yeah, no, I think we've kind of narrowed our market down in Social Suite, our membership down to like intermediate creators. A lot of them are maybe starting to do brand partnerships. They're looking to just do them more consistently, but it's been also really cool to see a lot of those intermediate creators turn into more advanced creators, even some of them, like making that their full-time job now. So we started off very intermediate, but now we've kind of like started to dip into this advanced creator, career creator category as well. So it's been very cool for those career creators to be able to also weigh in on a lot of the things that the intermediate creators are feeling, because again, so many of them are so similar, like they're going through such
Hmm.
similar things, but the intermediate creators don't necessarily think that the other big creators are going through those, but they are.
Right. Yeah. What do you see, like when you look at the career creators, people who are making this full time? What is it that you see some of the biggest struggles are there?
I think consistency in income is one of the biggest struggles, I would say. The other thing I can think of as well is kind of just like inspiration and motivation. I know for me as a career creator, I often feel that where I feel like I've said everything. And so I have to like try and dig really deep to try and
Mm,
find new exciting ways of saying a lot of the same things that I've been saying for years. And so sometimes that can be challenging, a little frustrating.
mm,
And again, consistency with monetization, where even when you do have multiple streams of income, some months are doing really well and some months they're not. So if
mhm.
you're someone who doesn't really like that fluctuation, I think it is very difficult to feel comfortable. Like you can never feel comfortable because like something's always just like changing and moving.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the life of the entrepreneur, I think, to some extent. And I hear you on
Yeah.
the
Yep.
sort of repetitive content and feeling comfortable with it and consistency. I was talking to Ellie Diop was on the show recently too, and she shared certainly that there's that getting that comfort with sharing things, and she shared a few tips of like how she got more comfortable. And I think part of it is, especially as your audience grows, there's always new people who've joined who haven't even heard you say it once. And then I
Hmm.
actually think a lot of people need to hear it, 10 or 20 times for it to sort of sink in, make a difference. And even when I think about what I consume from a social content perspective, from my favorite creators, I'm totally happy watching them put a new take, slightly new take on saying the same thing over and over again.
Hmm.
Like it's surprising how many times I can listen to my favorite creators say essentially the same thing over again, but it like sinks in a new way, or I haven't seen it in a while, or it's a good reminder. I'm like, right, I got to try that. So I think there's a way we can get over, recognize that there's no one out there consuming every single thing you do. And certainly no one sitting there going, you said this already. Like they're probably saying like, right, you said that before. I got to remember that. So it's good to keep
Hmm.
that going. And then
Yeah,
on
you're
the,
definitely paying a lot more attention than everyone else is. Not
yeah,
in like a mean way, but that's the truth.
yeah, totally. Yeah, no one, and that's like for all walks of life everywhere. No one's really paying attention to everything you're doing at the level you are by any means.
Right.
Yeah, you mentioned on the sort of the consistency in the content creating, and I've seen two paths. Some people take the more, I'll be inspired when, and others, and a lot more, certainly on the successful side, I see take. There's a book called the War of Art, not the Art of War by Sun Tzu, but the War of Art, where, and in the summary of it really is like, you have a dedicated block of time every day where you create and you do art, and you're not waiting for inspiration to strike or writer's block. Like If you're a writer, you just write for that period of time every single day, and eventually that leads to the inspiration and the strokes of genius and the creation. Do you personally take one approach or the other? How do you look at this, or even when you're guiding people on the consistency of creation?
I think when I'm guiding other people, I like to provide a lot of options with this because I don't think for everyone there's like one right way to do it. That's actually one of the hard lessons I've learned as a coach is I like one way of doing things, but I used to teach that same way to everyone and be like, I don't know why they're not getting it. Like, what do you mean? It's right here. Like, it makes sense. But I've had to really learn about like different learning styles or different productivity styles.
Mm.
There's actually on this website called Todoist, they have a quiz and it's like productivity style quiz. And I recommend that to actually all of my creators that I
Mm.
work with who, when we're talking about productivity, because I think that quiz can actually spit out a better option for them to start experimenting with than I can, because I
Mm.
might again do it one way and they do it very differently.
Right.
But for me personally, I think I'm definitely the type of person where when inspiration strikes, I either have to write it down in depth at that moment and then
Mm-hmm.
try and execute it later, or I have to just sit down and do it at that moment. Because I
Mm.
find sometimes when I try and execute it later, it doesn't feel as exciting to me.
Right.
And so I'm
Yes.
like, then I start to question it and I'm like, should I even do this? Are people going to like this? And then I end up just either like leaving it in my drafts
Mm.
forever or I just never record it. So I'm definitely the type of person where I wake up usually in the morning and I'll say, okay, I'm going to create a video about this. And I do have kind of like a little database for when I don't have ideas. I'll just pull something from that. But I will record my videos for socials every single day and do it like hit post immediately because I can't let it sit for too long and simmer.
Or you start to question it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
I've definitely had that where like middle of the night I'm like, "Oh, I should do something on this." And then the next day I'm like, "I don't know. It's yeah."
Eh.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But I'm not getting out of bed to go shoot something. So sometimes I just have to like come
True.
back to it. But I totally I get this I get the same thing for sure. How are you thinking about AI in this space?
See, I really like AI and I've found a lot of ways to use it that has just made my workflow a lot quicker and easier. I very much will use it to ideate most of the
Hmm.
time. And sometimes in some situations, I will have it write and I've kind of trained it to write in my writing style.
Hmm.
I do that specifically with like threads or sometimes LinkedIn posts as well, where
Yeah.
I'll say, here are the things that I want to talk about. Here's like the experience that I want to include. That's like my personal story. Now make me a post of this in Kristen's writing style. And I
Mm.
still usually end up changing a couple of things around. But I think for creators who are trying to like be everywhere at once, using AI is going to make that so much easier for you.
Mhm.
And again, when you can make it customized, like when it's writing something, it's writing in my writing style that I've trained it to write in.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot more, acceptable, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. I couldn't agree more. And there's some interesting ways of using it, as you said, almost like a thought partner, where you can even
Yeah.
to that thing of like the repetitive ideas of like feeding it your repetitive ideas, saying, "Here's a bunch of stuff I've talked about. What are some peripheral or like related things or other things I should be thinking about?" And then even if it just gives you bullet points back, you're like, "Right, I could go deep on that one, or I could go here."
Mhm.
Even if it's not creating it for you, it's giving you like that. I love the that ability to sort of bounce ideas back off of it and get something fresh back or a new
Right.
perspective on it.
Yeah, actually, at the VidCon panel with Thinkific, Andrea, who was sitting beside me, she says that she uses Otter AI and just like goes on a walk every morning and just talks to it and then
Mhm.
puts it into Chat GPT and is like, all right, now organize all of my thoughts. And as soon as we got back into town, I was like, I have to try that. It was so smart. And it's actually something I've been doing pretty frequently now where I will again go on a walk,
Mm.
I'll speak to it and then I'll come back and say, all right, based off of that, like let's make me a to-do list
Mm.
and also like maybe give me some marketing ideas or tell me like if you have any research that can support this idea. And again, it is really kind of like a partner, which is really nice because then you do have that, I guess it's like not another person, but it kind of is
Yeah.
something else to bounce ideas off of.
Yeah, that's great. Certainly. Yeah. Yeah. And of course, we've got the Leap where I don't know if you've tried it, but we've got a lot of AI built in there helping people create a lot of storefronts and products, and really with a focus on social and mobile, but definitely powered very heavily under the scenes by AI.
Yeah, I also use AI in the lead magnet builder on Thinkific recently, which
Oh,
was
nice.
super great.
Awesome. What's the, as a creator for yourself, best piece of advice you've been given?
I would say the best advice that I've ever been given as a creator, especially when it comes to brand partnerships, is that you are a 50-50 partner. You're not just being
Mm,
hired by the brand to do whatever they say. So when you get a contract and you don't agree with things, or a brand gives you a script and you know that if you read it, your audience is going to hate it and not respond well
mm,
to it, you have to remember that you are just as much inclined to be able to say, hey, this is not going to work. I think we should change it, as
mm.
the brand is. So you have to remember that you're a 50-50 partner. That's a hard lesson to
Yeah.
learn.
No, that's great as well. And I think it's true too, as part of that, that you know your audience way better than they do. And, that's someone who's probably good at marketing, but they certainly don't know you or your audience or your fit. And they
Right.
probably haven't invested near as much time in thinking about this as you have. They might even be using ChatGPT to write that script for you.
That's actually probably true. Yeah.
Awesome. Kristen, where can people find out more about you and your community and programs?
Yeah, my Instagram is KBOUSQ. You can send me a message, ask me all of the questions. I'd love to connect with you guys. And our membership is called Social Suite. You can find out more about that at yoursocialmate.com/membership.
Awesome. And we'll put all the links in the show notes too.
Awesome.
Amazing.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Kristen. This was great. Really appreciate it.